Dr. Gregg Murray is my special guest. He's a political scientist at Augusta University. Dr. Murray, thank you so much for being here. Y'all have a great political science department. I'm glad you're here to represent it.
I absolutely agree. We do have a great group of political scientists, and I appreciate the invitation to spend a little time with you today.
Well, it's our pleasure. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we have this humongous field of Democrats running for president, all trying to take down President Trump. Right before we taped this broadcast, you had a couple of debates for the Democratic candidates, both the ones who were lower in the polling and the ones who are at the top of the polling, taking the stage on separate nights. My question is it possible from those two debates, two nights, for a few of them to emerge as the front runners? Is that enough of time for us to see them and choose which ones we like?
I think a lot of people are going to get a sense of whether they like people or not, these candidates, because personality does have a lot to do with whether someone likes a candidate or not. So I think a lot of people will get a sense from that. These debates that we just had the past couple of days, I think, are going to be really important because they're going to start winnowing down the field of candidates. We're 20 or so right now, and my suspicion is we're going to be dramatically reduced from that just because going into the next round of debates, which I guess is in mid-September in Houston, they're only going to take candidates who meet certain thresholds for being at the debate. And if you're not on those debates, you don't count as a serious contender, and you're going to be pretty much done. So I think these debates people were watching for, one, whether the front runners were able to withstand the attacks, which I think Biden more or less did last night, and two, whether there was going to be any breakout amongst the people who are way down in the polls. And some people did well in that regard, like Harris did in the first debate. But last night, I'm not sure there were any big breakouts in terms of the contenders.
You know, their time is so limited. The stage is packed, and their time on TV is minuscule by the time the debates are over. Are you just going for that home run soundbite to get that voter to say, okay, that's my person?
They seem to pitch their stuff that way. You can tell they have their little sound bites
that
they're ready to throw out there and hope that something goes viral for them. I think that's what they're doing, and it's always surprising in terms of what catches on with people and what doesn't, and what piques people's interest. Some people want more subdued, stated, statesman-like candidates, and some people want bomb throwers, and you get a combination of those.
Does that make us shallow, that's all we need?
Oh,
you know,
I think there is a shallowness to it. Now, let me talk a little bit about how I approach that in my political science classes. The problem with politics, and I think why we get shallow sometimes, is because politics is extraordinarily complicated. Government policy is extraordinarily complicated. And for people to actually know what's going on a broad scale across a number of issues takes an incredible amount of time. Most people are just trying to get to work, trying to get their kids to school, trying to hang out with their families a little bit, and they just don't have the time or the energy, or really, quite frankly, the interest a lot of times, to dedicate all the time that it takes to follow politics. And so we end up falling back on some of these seemingly more shallow characteristics that lead us to support who we support.
You mentioned Biden, you mentioned Harris. Do you see any of the big names losing relevance or losing steam because of their performance in these past couple and maybe a couple more future debates?
I think in the future you certainly will. You're going to have a shakeout on the Sanders-Warren side, that lane. Those are the two big names, are the ones attracting all of the attention in terms of what I think of as clearly liberal or clearly progressive candidates. One of them is going to have to fall by the wayside. I think Biden is trying to withstand the attacks to be sort of the more center moderate candidate, and we'll kind of see what happens on the other candidates. A lot of them express policy preferences that are very similar to that those three candidates when you really boil it down. So it's hard how do you decide who you're going to vote for, and how do you differentiate between them?
Is there a dark horse that you can see right now, somebody that's not getting a lot of play that might start rising?
I don't know. I'm wondering if Cory Booker's going to come in. He's very well spoken. He has some very interesting policy perspectives. He can talk from the diversity angle. I think that I think that Biden, in comparison, is struggling in terms of being well-spoken or not. He seems to be struggling a little bit from time to time in what he's saying. A lot of the other candidates, though, are also well-spoken and sharp when they're talking. Elizabeth Warren can speak going on forever and very smoothly.
Yeah.
Bernie does pretty well in that regard too. So, but those are all the front runners we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had to pick sort of somebody who's maybe in danger of not being around after this next round. I don't know if he's going to hit the 2% that he needs for Houston. But if I had to pick somebody, he might be one of those people.
Let me ask you about the voter psyche and what motivates us to go to the polls. You know, it's one thing to be charmed by a candidate or to like his or her soundbite or charisma. But how do you get on your feet and go to the polls other than somebody dragging you there? Is it a topic that spurs us to go cast our ballot? Is it something beyond just the way a candidate looks or sounds? Because that's what it boils down to, the turnout.
Oh, of course, yeah, it very much does. And you've heard for several campaign cycles now that it's all about turnout, and that seems to be what a lot of the campaigns have done, is devote their resources to trying to turn out their base. So I think there are a lot of things that get people out to vote. There's the civic duty angle on it in terms of you go vote because you just feel like you're supposed to do it, and you'd feel guilty if you didn't do it.
And because you're free to do it.
That's exactly right. And a lot of people vote for that very reason. They're not very excited about the candidates, but they feel like they're supposed to do it, so they go do it. Then you've got some people who vote more or less episodically, and those people are motivated by either an issue that's come up or maybe a candidate that they're particularly excited about, and that really depends on who catches on. One thing that we found in terms of at least the last couple elections, it's probably gone back further than that, is voting against another candidate. There's a lot of evidence that people voted for Trump because they were actually voting against Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. My suspicion is there's going to be a pretty big turnout in this election of people voting for whoever the Democratic candidate is because they just want to vote against Trump, and they otherwise may not be even interested in voting. So those are some of sort of the basic things that turn people out.
Conversely, can a candidate discourage people from voting on the other side by making them think he or she is unbeatable? And so they just say, why even bother? It's going to be a runaway.
Well, yeah, and you see that in campaigns all the time, particularly when they get towards the end, right? And they start looking at who's ahead in the polls and all that. And actually, Hillary Clinton was facing a little bit of this back in 2016. It looked like she was going to walk away from it. And if you noticed watching the election towards the end, she said, hey, we do not have this wrapped up. We need people to go out and vote. That is a very big concern because it is costly for people to go vote.
Let me ask you about the front runners once again. When, timetable-wise, will we have a feel for who's going to face Donald Trump, or even who of two or three might be the Democrats to face him?
I'm thinking probably towards the end of this year and early, maybe January, February of next year. What you'll end up with, Iowa starts in January. The early states start towards the end of the year and the very beginning of the following year, and you'll have some people who go into those who had high expectations and fell out, and they just didn't perform the way they thought they had wanted to perform. So they will start falling out then, and then you'll get sort of a better idea of who is going to end up being in the fight.
I mentioned the Mueller report before we started our interview. Do you think it's going to have any lasting impact with voters? It seems as if it's losing steam. His performance before Congress wasn't great. Do you think that people are losing interest in that, or that whole Russia thing, Mueller thing, is going to still be a factor?
I think it's a partisan thing. And what you're going to find is that Democrats are going to continue to pick at that report and take bits and pieces from it that are helpful to them or their case that they feel, and you're going to find Republicans doing the same thing. Democrats are very fired up about the Mueller report and all that investigation. Republicans are saying, you know, there's no criminal charges against the president, so what are you guys doing? And I think it's just going to probably play out in terms of partisanship, which is the way a lot of these issues play out.
Are your students going to vote? Are they into it?
Some of them will, sure. Some of them will. I'm actually going to be teaching a campaigns and elections class in the spring, so I'm hoping that'll motivate a few of them. But yeah, the students get into it and are interested in what's happening, and a lot of it's about the future that they face. So I'm hoping they're going to get out and vote and take part.
Well, I can't thank you enough for helping to shape those young minds and teach them how our nation's political system works, and appreciate the insight today, Dr. Murray.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed being
With italki, you'll have a select